What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shape their professional trajectory. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, the voice of America's CEO community. I'm your host, Don Yeager, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is Alan Stein Jr. Alan spent 15 years working as a basketball performance coach alongside some of the greatest NBA players of all time, including Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and Kobe Bryant. Today, he coaches organizations like American Express, Pepsi, and Starbucks on how to apply his strategies into their daily routine. And today, he is bringing his expertise to you. Alan has written 2 books, Raise Your Game and Sustain Your Game, and has a podcast as an extension of his writing. He is a passionate father of 3 and likes to say that he plays zone defense and never lets his kids win at anything ever. I love that. At the end of these conversations, you often hear me say to our guests, I took pages of notes from this discussion. Well, recently, a few of you asked if we could make those notes available to our podcast family, and the answer is absolutely. We now have it set up so that when you visit corporatecompetitorpodcast.com/108, you can download today's notes and reflection questions so that you can include corporate competitor content into your personal growth plan.
Many times leaders unconsciously send very mixed messages. I see leaders preaching to the team about how they want everyone to have a work-life balance. I want you to be able to have dinner with your spouse and go to your kids' soccer games. And then I'm going to send you an email at 11 o'clock at night and I'm going to expect a response. I'm telling you one thing, but now my behavior is demonstrating the exact opposite. You should be going on a date night with your spouse or to your kids' games so that everyone else realizes, hey, this is kind of the way we do things here.
Alan, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's so great to be with you.
I loved reading your story, learning more about you. I saw that you first picked up a basketball in kindergarten, and now 4 decades later, the sport has completely shaped your business and your life. Many of the best players in the game, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Kobe Bryant, have thanked you openly for how you've helped them develop. But while you're helping them, I know they've taught you lessons.
For sure. Back in 2007, I had an opportunity to work the first ever Kobe Bryant Skills Academy. And Nike was bringing in the top high school and college players from around the country for a really intense 3-day mini camp with Kobe, who was the best player in the game. And there was a college counselor there that didn't have the physical stature or physical resume of the other college counselors, but there was something really different about this kid. And all of the coaching staff noticed it immediately. We did 2 workouts a day for 3 straight days, 3-hour grueling, intense sessions. At the end of the very first workout, this young man tapped me on the shoulder and said, Coach, will you rebound for me? Because I don't leave the gym until I swish 5 free throws in a row. Swishing 5 in a row is a really, really high standard. I mean, a swish by definition is the perfect shot.
Right.
Nothing but net, baby. Nothing but net. And this young man wasn't going to leave until he swished 5 in a row. He could swish 4 in a row and he could hit just a little bit of the rim on the 5th one. It would still go in. He'd still be mathematically perfect. He'd still be 5 for 5. But for him, that wasn't good enough. He would start the count over. And it never took him longer than 12 to 15 minutes to swish 5 in a row. That young man was Stephen Curry of the Golden State Warriors. Will go down in history as the greatest shooter to ever play the game. And it's not by accident, and it's not by luck, and it's not even because his dad Dell was a NBA marksman for a decade. It's because Steph is willing to hold himself to unparalleled standards. If you want to improve any area of your life, one of the first steps you have to take is raise your standard, raise what you're willing to accept, and raise your level of excellence, and making sure that everything you do in your life is individualized and customized and applicable to you. I've never actually had this conversation with Steph. My guess is when he was in middle school, his standard at that time was probably not swishing 5 in a row. Maybe it was just make 5 in a row, or maybe it was swish 2 in a row or something else. And he's continued to level up and graduate to an increased standard. I always make sure, especially when I tell that story in front of a basketball audience of younger players, that I'm not telling them that they need to immediately go and adopt all of Steph Curry's standards. They need to find something that is appropriately challenging to them, something that will stretch them and push them, but to not play the dangerous game of the comparison game of just trying to do exactly what somebody else does. I have to catch myself playing that game as well. There's so many people in the speaking game, you being one of them, that I have so much respect and reverence and admiration for. There are traits and qualities that guys like you have that I want to be able to emulate, but I'm not looking to carbon copy anyone else's blueprint. I want to make sure that I'm creating what's best for me. I try to have good habits to improve myself mentally, physically, and emotionally, and try to provide some balance between those three so that I'm not just one-dimensional as I'm hopefully working towards self-actualization and improvement.
I love it. I didn't know Steph back when you're talking about, but watching his body change over the years, you're right. In high school, if you watched his shot, it was everything he could do to get the ball up because he was so tiny, so lightly framed. Over time, as you said, he up-leveled the standards that he set for himself. He never stood still in any one place.
No, so well said. And again, I haven't had this conversation with Dell either, but if I had to guess, the biggest gift that Dell gave Steph, and Seth for that matter, was that he modeled how important it is to get in quality repetitions during the unseen hours. I almost wish the media would highlight more of what Steph does in the unseen hours. We get to see all of the highlights, and some of his highlights are some of the most magical things I've ever seen someone do with a basketball. But if people saw how much work he put in empty gyms when no one else was there, you'll kind of realize why he's so good.
Oh, yeah.
Was Steph and Seth born with maybe an above average level of depth perception and hand-eye coordination and athleticism? Yeah, probably. Was his dad able to teach proper footwork and shooting mechanics at a young age? Most certainly. But the most important thing that he taught Steph was that if you want to be good at anything, you have to put in the work and you have to get in the reps. It's been well documented that Dell would take those little youngins into the gym when they could barely hold a basketball, starting to just soak in and see that my dad, first of all, loves to play the game. He takes his craft very serious and he gets in the reps and he puts in the work. So then they connect the dots. Hey, my dad is one of the best three-point shooters in the history of the game, and my dad works on his craft during the unseen hours. Those things are connected. I don't have the acumen or the legacy of a Dell Curry, but I still show my children that if I want to be good on stage or I want to be good on page, it takes effort and it takes reps. You have to put in the work.
No question. I love the unseen hours discussion. I've heard you discuss it on the stage. Knowing you, I know how much time you put into your craft. Yes, it's fun to be out there. It's fun to be there where there's the applause, the audience, the others who are there to let you know that they appreciate what you're doing. But where you show them your appreciation is when no one's watching.
For sure. And I conveniently stole that concept from my good friend, Drew Hanlon, who's an NBA skills trainer extraordinaire, works out Joel Embiid, Jason Tatum, and Zach LaVine. Drew's one of the best that I've ever met. And he was the one that first coined that term, or at least that I was aware of it. It's what you do when the cameras are off, the arena is empty, and the cheerleaders aren't dancing. It's the work you put in then that will determine how well you perform when the lights do come on, the arena is packed, and the cheerleaders are dancing. Certainly understood how applicable it was to the game of basketball, but then immediately realized that it's applicable to every area of our life.
Everything.
Yeah. And I know that you know that. I mean, the due diligence and level of preparation that you and your team have put into leading up to this interview, remarkable. I mean, puts you in the upper 1% of people that do what you do. And that shows me that you understand how important preparation is. And for both of us, to put in work to prepare during the unseen hours, then just allows us on this call in particular to be present. We don't have anything to memorize, anything to worry about. All we have to do is just be present because we've done so much of the heavy lifting on the front end that it takes the pressure off. I want to do so much due diligence and rehearse incessantly to the point that once I step on stage, I can take a deep breath, smile, and just be.
I love it. By the way, as part of the preparation to be in this call, the pictures from your yearbook, not afraid to throw your shoulder into people.
I hardly had the shoulders to hold up a uniform. I was like a human coat hanger. But crazy part is now I have 12-year-old twin sons and I have a 10-year-old daughter. And now that my kids are starting to get older, my one son, Jack in particular, I mean, he is mini me, spitting image of me. I show him pictures of when I was 12 years old. They're almost identical. I've shown him some of those yearbook pictures and told him that, if he doesn't eat a couple of sandwiches, that's what he's going to end up looking like.
That's right. You wrote the book, Raise Your Game. You talk about habits of high performance. One of the things that you've taught me and others over the years is the idea of reframing stress. It all starts by defining it.
Modern day philosopher Eckhart Tolle's definition of stress made the hairs on my neck stand up, and it just hit me with a 2x4. It just resonated so strongly. Stress is the desire for things to be different than they are in the present moment. That statement is riddled in simplicity, but there's so much depth behind that. Your stress doesn't come from outside circumstances or events. Your stress doesn't come from what people say or what people do. Your stress comes from your resistance to those things. When you try to fight against reality, a fight you can never win, that's what causes your stress. Full transparency, for 42 years of my life, I was in the other camp. I kind of played the victim card. I would find myself stressed out and I would blame, complain, or make excuses about external circumstances were the reason that I was stressed. I gave my power away. So I was unaware of the fact that I had created this narrative and this story on what stress was that may not have been accurate and certainly wasn't one that was serving me. All these years, I had been giving my power away because I was allowing external things to control my mood and my mindset and my perspective. I was letting the outside world dictate my inside world. That often left me feeling helpless, feeling apathetic. And awareness is always the first step to improving anything, because we'll never fix something we're oblivious to, and we'll never improve something we're unaware of. There was something about the way that Eckhart said that definition. It heightened my awareness. And it was like this weight was lifted off my shoulders when I started to internalize Eckhart's definition of it, having some level of acceptance of what is and not trying to fight against it. Light bulb moment just switched everything for me. And I realized, wait, I'm the one with the power, because no matter what happens, even in the face of immense tragedy or adversity, I still get to choose how I show up and how I respond. And that the only person I'm punishing in the previous way I was doing this was myself.
Wow.
Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. These external forces that have the potential to create stress are inevitable. These things aren't going away, and they're still just as much in my life today as they've ever been, but I choose whether or not I suffer from them. And that suffering basically comes from resistance. That's where suffering comes from. Now, I'm not saying that what goes on in the world is necessarily your preference. I'm not even saying that everything that goes on in this world is inherently good. What I'm saying is those things are outside of your control, and it's completely futile to try to fight against them. So if you can be fluid and on some level surrender and accept, this is what's happening. Even if I don't like it, I'm going to accept it. And I'm going to put all of my faculties into having a thoughtful, intentional response. Instead of focusing on external circumstances, focusing on your response to those external circumstances is ultimately what will dictate your stress level. And I won't pretend for 1 second that I don't ever feel stress. I mean, I am a work in progress. This is not something I'm speaking from a place of mastery on, but I can tell you, since internalizing that definition, my own stress in my life has gone down significantly. This concept of outer world versus inner world, was a seismic shift for me. And the last 4 years of my life have been incredibly different than the first 42. That's why the work that you and I do is incredibly important. We're talking about proven principles and strategies that have been around for decades. But in your books and what you say on stage, you may say something that catches the right person at the right time, and it can be a life changer for them.
Absolutely.
I recognize that the overwhelming majority of things that I share from stage are not things that I created. These are not things I invented. These are things that have been taught for longer than I've been breathing, and things that I've learned from amazing people like you. All I'm doing is packaging it slightly different and saying it in a different way that's very genuine and authentic to me and my experiences. But I recognize that I could say something that someone has heard in concept a million times, but I may say it in just a slightly different way that they have that same light bulb moment. And then it starts to resonate with them.
That's so special. After these last couple of pandemic years, burnout is one of those hot discussions. How do we create greater resilience? What are the points of how we do this? Given all your study, given the work you've done, the research you've engaged in, and the conversations you've had, what advice are you giving to people about burnout and increased resilience?
Well, the first is allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough and have the courage to acknowledge it and admit it. Many of the people that follow your work and listen to your show are most likely incredibly driven, ambitious, hard drivers. Their work ethic and their grit and their resilience is probably responsible for a good portion of their success. Generally speaking, it's been rather taboo in our society to be able to acknowledge some of these vulnerabilities.
So true.
And as the wonderful work of Dr. Brene Brown bringing to light how important it is to be vulnerable as a leader, if anyone is feeling like they're approaching burnout, it's okay to admit it and to acknowledge it and bring it to awareness. It is okay to not be okay. You're not alone.
Right.
None of us are immune to the difficulties of life. Life is really, really hard. Now, life is good, but life is hard. Those two things can coexist simultaneously. People try to suppress or resist or ignore some of those feelings that are moving towards burnout because they feel that it shows weakness. And then they often start to pile shame and guilt on top of that, which makes a really toxic cocktail of emotions. It's selfish of me to be feeling burned out when I have this amazing job. I'm the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I make a really, really, really good living. I have a good life. How selfish and entitled must I be if I'm feeling burnt out? You have to learn how to let that go. Dig a little deeper and figure out, what do you believe is causing the burnout? I define burnout as a misalignment between the hours you're putting in and the sacrifices you're making and the meaning and fulfillment you're getting from your work. If those two things start to splinter, you're heading towards burnout. If you don't find your work meaningful or purposeful, you're at risk for burnout. If you don't find your work fascinating or enjoyable, you're at risk for burnout. If you don't feel like your work is making a contribution to those around you or to the greater good, you are at risk of burnout. And these things get so out of whack where people get to the point where they're working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. They're neglecting their self-care. They're neglecting their nuclear family at home. And they're pouring all of this time and energy into something that is not reciprocating. That's where burnout stems. I'm assuming at some point you did enjoy the work. You did find it fulfilling. You did find it meaningful. You did feel like you were making a contribution. You were fascinated by it. Deconstruct it and start to figure out, where did some of that change? Did you start taking on a new role or new responsibilities that maybe aren't in alignment with your skill sets or strengths? Are you working with different people that maybe doesn't make it as enjoyable? Maybe there's a different metric for measuring your performance, creating blind spots so you can't really see how your work is making a contribution to others. Where did you lose the love? That takes a tremendous amount of courage and honesty and vulnerability and a lot of self-reflection and introspection.
And that ability to actually speak truth to yourself, which a lot of people struggle with. We watch social media feeds constantly thinking, gosh, everybody else seems so happy. Everyone else seems to have it so well together. What is it about me? And it could devolve into a real sense of loneliness at some stage.
Yeah.
You're a huge believer in structure because structure leads to consistency. One of the most important traits of high performers. You've written that in several of your books. I know you talk about it often on the stage. For some people, structure comes naturally. For others, it's a real challenge. What advice would you give to someone who's asking how to improve in that area?
Well, this goes back to something I said earlier about how important it is for us to each have the self-awareness to know how we operate best. What kind of guardrails do I need to put up in my life so that I can consistently show up as my best self? And for me, one of the massive guardrails is structure, is consistency, is repetition. The levels of structure, it's kind of on a spectrum. You have someone on one end who could have militaristic precision and structure and consistency. And then on the other end, you have someone that loves being completely free and spontaneous. They don't even know what they're going to do the morning they wake up. I'm not here to say that either one is right or either one is good. We need to figure out where on that continuum we fall and how do we operate best. There's three things that I've learned about myself that help me operate at a high level. The first is I love structure and I love consistency. I like things being in an incredibly organized manner. If you were to come into my office right now, there's not a piece of paper out of place. That works really well for me. And that's how I operate best. The second is I'm actually very heavily introverted. I derive my energy from solitude and stillness. Now, I'm not antisocial and I love people. There is nothing I would rather be doing during this hour than having this chat with you. I mean, I love this type of stuff, but being with people and especially being on stage actually drains my energy. When I get off stage and I'm done shaking some hands and talking to some folks, which absolutely is something I enjoy, I can't wait to get back to my hotel room and sit in complete silence, because that's how I actually refill my tank so that I can then go pour into others. Even as a father, there used to be times where I would come back from a 3 or 4 day work trip, been on a couple of stages, and I'd come right home and pick up my children, and my tank was empty. I wasn't showing up as a very present father. I was often kind of grouchy and irritable through no fault of my children, but I didn't build in time for me to refuel my tank so that I could then show up as the best father for my children. And then the third thing that I know that I operate best is I love the early mornings. When it comes 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, I say with a huge smile, I'm not worth a whole lot at that point. All of my faculties start to shut down, but I thrive from 6 to 10 in the morning. So I've learned to schedule my day so that a lot of the heavy lifting I have to do, either literal or figurative, is done during those hours, because I know that's when I'm at my best. When I know that I've got guardrails and structure, I know that I have alone time and solitude, and I know that I can do my best work in the morning, and I build my schedule around that, it allows me to operate at my best, which is all I'm ever looking to do. I'm not here to try and be better than anybody else. I'm just looking to operate in my best.
You know, you mentioned that you do your best work in the morning. I know you have amazing stories with somebody else who was masterful in the morning, Kobe Bryant. Talk to me about a lesson learned from Kobe in an early morning workout. I know you've had a few with him, but give me a lesson from Kobe.
At that 2007 Kobe Bryant Skills Academy, the one where I had a chance to meet Steph when he was a college counselor, Kobe was nice enough to allow me to watch one of his really early morning workouts. I got there at 3:30 in the morning and he was already in the gym with a full sweat.
Right.
The first portion of his workout, he was doing basic footwork and basic offensive moves. He spent the first 20 minutes without even having a ball in his hand. He was doing different pivoting drills and footwork drills. And that really surprised me as a young coach, because in my opinion, in 2007, Kobe was the best player on the planet. So I anticipated going there and seeing him doing some drills with some flash and some sexiness and some sizzle. And instead, he was just drilling in on the fundamentals. And I asked him later that day at camp, point blank said, Kobe, you're the best player in the game. Why are you doing such basic drills? He gave me a huge smile, but he said in a very serious tone, why do you think I'm the best player in the world? Because I never get bored with the basics.
Mm.
That was another light bulb moment for me in my career, very similar to the epiphanal moment that I had hearing Eckhart Tolle, because it's when I finally acknowledged that just because something is basic, it doesn't mean that it's easy. A lot of people use those words interchangeably as if they're synonyms, but they don't mean the same thing. There are so many things in life that are basic in principle, but are still really hard to execute. That's one of the biggest separators that I found amongst good performers and elite performers. Is elite performers trust, respect, and appreciate and embrace the fundamentals, and they're willing to work relentlessly towards mastery of them during the unseen hours. Seeing Kobe in there doing footwork drills that I had taught to middle school age players just reminded me of how important the basics and the fundamentals are.
I love it. Our research team was able to find your high school yearbook. Looking at those photos from Watkins Mill High School in Maryland, you love the game, basketball, and you're pretty darn good at it, looking at the numbers. Is there a story you remember from Coach Lieberman or that team that will help us understand kind of the early development of the Alan Stein love for sports and what it can teach us?
Well, you know what's fascinating is I look at myself almost as having lived two separate lives. Many of the things that I now know at 46 and that I teach on stage or on page, I embodied the exact opposite of many of those traits when I was younger.
Mm.
I won't go as far as to say I was uncoachable, but I was incredibly hard-headed, when I was in high school. There were many times that I thought I knew best and I thought I knew more than Coach Lieberman. He would say something to me and turn around and I would just roll my eyes or have bad body language. A lot of the things that I preach now come from a place of empathy and compassion because I realized that wasn't how I was wired then. A lot of it stemmed from insecurity. I was incredibly insecure as a young man in a variety of capacities, and I would try and mask that insecurity by this false bravado and this false confidence, if you will, which really closed me off to being open to feedback and really allowing somebody to coach me. I've learned to reconcile that and forgive myself. And I don't have any regrets from it because that's the best I could do at that time with the limited awareness that I had. And now that I'm on the other side, it does give me greater empathy when somebody feels stuck, closed off, or walled off. Coach Lieberman was a really strict coach. I mean, he came from kind of the Bobby Knight school of thought where you coach through fear, you coach through 4-letter words, and you coach with a very high volume. Because I was always resisting and fighting against him, I was usually singled out. Usually when things weren't going well, I was going to take the brunt of that. And my attitude was always, I'll show you. And I would actually raise my level of performance. The harder he coached me and the more I tried to push against him, he could actually get the best out of me. So for that, I was incredibly thankful, but it was a very tumultuous relationship. I probably should have been way more open and appreciative of the love that he was pouring into me. And it wasn't something that I realized until I'd been out of high school for a couple of decades.
You became a really incredible skills coach. Were you learning and appreciating skills even then?
Absolutely. I had always had a very strong appreciation for being a very fundamentally sound player. It was very obvious to me by the time I got to high school that for the level I was on, I was a pretty good athlete. 6'1", 160 pounds, soaking wet, could hardly hold up my jersey. And it's not like I was jumping out of the gym like Russell Westbrook and dunking on people. My athleticism and or size was never going to be the separator for me. The things that could be a separator for me was my skill level, my understanding of the game and my basketball IQ, and my fitness level.
Well, they let you separate yourself enough that you went on to Elon in North Carolina. I love being able to talk to people who played athletics with several different coaching styles because it teaches us a lot about adaptation. Tell me a little what you learned in that transition.
Well, when I went to Elon, this was still in the day and age of VHS tapes. They didn't have a huge recruiting budget. My mother is from Durham, North Carolina, which is not far from Elon. A couple of times when we were visiting my grandmother, I had seen the campus and thought that that was a level that I could play. Great location. It was a beautiful campus. It was just far enough from home in Maryland that I felt like I was on my own, but it was still close enough that my parents could make the 4.5-hour drive to see me play. So I actually recruited Elon more than they recruited me. I would send in VHS tapes and handwritten letters about how I felt I could make a contribution. And thankfully, coach was open to it. And I was the only person in my freshman class of 5 players that wasn't from the state of North Carolina. Coach Simons was actually almost the exact opposite of Coach Lieberman. Very, very different coaching styles. Coach Simons to this day may be one of the nicest, sweetest men I have ever met. I don't think I ever heard Coach Simons curse. He rarely raised his voice. He's the guy that will tell you everything that you did really well in practice, where Coach Lieberman would highlight all of the things that you messed up. He coached through love, where Coach Lieberman coached through fear. I didn't have the social maturity or emotional intelligence to understand that that was a strength. I actually viewed that as somebody I could walk all over because, man, this guy is so much easier than my high school coach. I'll just do what I want. He ain't going to tell me otherwise. Obviously, that was an incredibly immature approach to it. It's so fascinating as I look back. I don't know that I was aware of any of that stuff in real time. I lacked significant self-awareness up until my 30s, to be honest with you, but definitely while I was in college. I was the king of blaming, complaining, and making excuses. My freshman year, I actually played a fairly significant amount. I started more than half of the games at Elon as a freshman and played pretty well. My limited mindset and lack of awareness allowed me to get complacent. I literally thought to myself, if I'm starting most of my games as a freshman, well, then I'm pretty much going to be a 4-year starter. I'm on easy street. I can go to parties and I can join a fraternity. I'm not going to miss any workouts or practices, but I don't need to do any extra work because I already got this thing on lock. Well, I didn't really understand that in college, coach is always trying to out recruit his previous class. And he brought in a really good class after mine. So my sophomore year, I didn't play very much.
Your minutes declined. Yeah.
Oh, they declined significantly. I was very quickly replaced. Understandably so. The guy that I was replaced by was a better player who put in more work during the offseason. And when I was relegated to that lesser role, there was a distinct fork in the road. I could have said, you know what? I'm going to get back in the gym. I'm going to build my body. I'm going to work on my skill sets. I'm going to earn my starting spot back. That is one path. Or the path that I took, I'm going to blame, complain, and make excuses. Coach Simons has no idea what he's talking about. He doesn't like me. Put it onto everything except for my own lack of effort and attitude for that reason. Unfortunately, that spiraled for pretty much the rest of my college career. I never saw any significant court time my last 3 years. And at the time, I thought in my own self-righteousness, it was because of Coach Simons. It was because of this. It was because of that. I never took ownership. Now, when I look back, it is so crystal clear that that was all on me. One of the things that I talk about most in my programs today is having an attitude of extreme ownership, a Jocko Willink phrase.
And I wouldn't want to argue with Jocko over it.
No, me either.
If he wants to own that, let him own it.
He can have it. I'll pay him a royalty if I need to.
Yeah.
And I try now to eliminate blaming, complaining, and making excuses. I try to hold myself accountable for everything in my life. I've forgiven my younger self for that. I was doing the best I could with a limited amount of awareness. And I now can reconcile the fact that I have empathy. When I was working at Montrose and DeMatha, sitting on the far end of the bench next to a player that doesn't play very much, they've got their shooting shirt on for most of the game. I could tell that they were just as frustrated and had this inner anger that I used to have. I could have some very connected and compassionate talks with them. And I would share with them the story of when I had that fork in the road and I took a left when I probably should have taken a right. And I actually think that has made me a better coach. So once again, I don't regret it for a second. Basketball has afforded me an amazing life, amazing experiences, amazing relationships. I mean, on some level, it's the reason you and I have been able to connect. I wouldn't rewrite an ounce of that.
I love that because could have easily spent the rest of your life complaining, but actually being able to use that moment as a teaching moment later in life and as an opportunity to take what was an uncomfortable and miserable situation for yourself and allow others to learn from it meant that the moment actually wasn't wasted at all.
Well said.
You know, you have gotten a chance to play on some great teams, be around great teams, understand what it means to create great team energy. Team is actually one of the words that I think is overused in our society. I think we have too many organizations that talk about my team, our team. And the truth is, they're really just a bunch of individual contributors who happen to have the same business card. As someone who understands what it takes to create the kind of excellence that is drawn when we all grow together, give our listeners a couple of tips on how do you take a group of individual contributors and mold them into something that we would call a team?
Very first thing you have to do is get crystal clear on your core values. Whether this is the head coach of a basketball team or the CEO or the executive staff of a business, you need to get crystal clear on what you stand for, what you believe in, what your non-negotiables are. And these don't need to be cliche words or phrases that are on your website or a beautifully engrossed sign behind the front desk. These need to be values that you live regularly. Another word that I think is thrown around a lot is culture. I view culture as an alignment between your beliefs and your behaviors. If these are our core values, this is what we're saying we believe. How well does everyone on our team live out these core values consistently? And if the answer to that is, yeah, most people live most of these values most of the time, then you've got a pretty decent culture. If the answer is no, we just have these words on our website and a nice sign, but nobody really does them, then you've got a weak culture. Once you've established your core values, which will help give you clarity on your North Star, your identity, why your team even exists in the first place, then you can do your best to attract and or recruit people that are in alignment with those core values. You don't have to do a ton of molding if you bring the right people into your organization that are aligned with those values in the first place. Then you need to train, develop, and coach them up so that they can be their best selves. And that will also help with retention. You won't lose very many people from your team if they're in alignment with your core values, they're growing and improving, and they feel like they're making a difference. You go to some of these companies, I know you've spoken to them before, and you meet people that have been working at the same place for 30 or 40 years. That's a testament to that type of culture. One other building block to this is making sure that roles are clearly defined, that everybody on the team knows their role, embraces their role, and tries to star in their role to the best of their ability, and that everyone else on the team values, respects, and appreciates the roles of their teammates. So no matter where you fall on the org chart, you wake up every day saying, I'm going to star in my role today, and I'm going to make a maximum contribution to the best of my ability. And I'm going to look around at my teammates and I'm going to show them a level of appreciation for their contributions. Then you've got something really special. And similar to the lesson I learned from Kobe, everything that I just said in the last 2 minutes is incredibly basic. My children have heard me give that talk and have not been confused, but there is not one thing that's easy about what I just described.
Right.
Getting human beings to buy into a role that might not be the role of their choosing, and getting people to live out core values, which might not be convenient in the moment, is why leadership is incredibly difficult.
You know what I love about it when you're talking about clarity? It's fascinating how so often you get to an organization, you and I have both done it. They talk about how desperately they want their employees to appreciate and take care of their customers. And yet they measure their employees by how many customers you can cycle through in an hour. What you measure is not in alignment with what you're asking them to be. Which path are they going to go down? We all know they're going to go down the path of what's measured. This idea of clarity isn't just about roles. Often it's about what do we truly stand for and how is what we are doing a potential impediment to us achieving those things.
Oh man, I'm so glad you went in that direction, and you're so on point. That's so insightful. Many times leaders unconsciously send very mixed messages. I'm a huge believer as a leader, you need to model the behavior you want to see in your team. And if you're going to expect it of your team, you have to expect it of yourself. Another one that I see all of the time is I see leaders preaching to the team about how they want everyone to have a work-life balance. I want you to be able to have dinner with your spouse and go to your kids' soccer games. And then I'm going to send you an email at 11 o'clock at night and I'm going to expect a response. I'm telling you one thing, but now my behavior is demonstrating the exact opposite. Very similar to that. I'm telling everyone on the team that I want you to have a work-life balance, but I keep promoting the people that don't live those values. I keep promoting and rewarding and giving a bonus to the guy in his 20s that doesn't have a family, who's willing to work 80 hours a week and work on weekends and not take vacation. He's climbing the ladder of our organization where everybody else is staying stagnant. Once again, I'm sending this mixed message. And I know that they do that unconsciously, that they're doing the best they can. That's why we have to bring it to a level of awareness. And if you're going to preach that you want a work-life balance, as the leader, you need to live that and model that, which means you shouldn't be sending emails at 11 o'clock at night. And you should be going on a date night with your spouse or to your kids' games so that everyone else realizes, hey, this is kind of the way we do things here.
Yeah. You know, Alan, I want our listeners to know, like, I have 5 podcasts that are regular in rotation for me as I'm getting exercise and other things. And your podcast, Raise Your Game, is one of those 5.
Thank you.
You've been at this for a while, interviewed a lot of great people. It's a great extension of your books and many of the other things that you're doing. But other than listening to your podcast, what are some other ways that those who are listening today might have a chance to learn more about you?
I've recently, as of in the last year, started putting a lot more effort into my YouTube channel and trying to consistently put out content in smaller chunks because I believe in a concept of micro learning. Everyone doesn't have the time to sit down and watch one of my 60-minute keynotes and or listen to a 20 or 30-minute podcast. So YouTube channel is one. And I very much embrace social media. I try to be a steady stream of quality content, sometimes in video form, sometimes in longer form written posts, sometimes in very short snippets to share and to engage and connect with folks. You can find more on me at alansteinjr.com. I also have a supplemental site, strongerteam.com. I'm very easily found on all of the major social platforms, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook at Alan Stein Jr. And my YouTube channel is Alan Stein Jr. as well. Hopefully those are some helpful resources, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with any of you that are kind enough to reach out.
You know, Alan, I've loved getting to know you over the years. I've loved studying what you do. Loved seeing you at amazing events like Dick Vitale's Gala and NSA and other places. You are the true definition of what we talk about here as a corporate competitor. Thank you so much for giving us your wisdom today and for allowing us to learn from you.
Pleasure's all mine, my friend. I have long admired and respected your work well before you and I even had the pleasure of meeting. So I hope you know that your work is making a huge impact in a lot of lives, and my name is at the top of that list.
What a gift. Alan Stein Jr. has been one of my favorites for years. I do love learning his content because he is so thoughtful, and his experience with high performers is something I can take something from every time I listen to him. I loved the discussion about Steph Curry actually setting up an unparalleled standard for himself. What is that standard for you? How can you actually up-level your game by up-leveling your standard? His discussion on stress and what it means to be stressed, and how in that moment, what you are doing is giving away the power that you have to control the environment that you can control because you're too busy being focused on things you can't. What powerful lesson there. Complacency. He started as a freshman and then began to believe he was destined to always start because that had happened for him. Complacency is the challenge for so many of us if we've achieved any level of success. But then I really thought the topic of burnout, acknowledging it if you are struggling with it, and then looking for the root cause. And as you go back and find where it is that the misalignment occurred for you between the hours you're giving and the passion you feel for what you're doing, you can begin to correct and actually pull yourself out of burnout. This will go down as one of the interviews I will enjoy as much as any. Thank you for being a corporate competitor with us today. If you haven't already done so, remember to download the notes I took from today's session on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com/108. Those notes include a reflection question so that you can incorporate our podcast into your personal growth plan. If you could share one habit, one thing you've done consistently that allowed you to separate yourself from your competitors, what would it be? In my 30-year career, 2,500 of the greatest athletes, coaches, and leaders answered that question for me.
This is Don Yeager, who did that that article I was telling you about.
Don, Dave Sims with Coach K. How you doing?
Hey, Don. How you doing, my man? Great, sir. How are
What they gave to me is what I'm giving to you in my online course, Journey to Greatness. Through engaging storytelling and on-demand videos, you will learn the 16 habits that will jumpstart your personal growth. I will instruct you on how to apply these winning characteristics to your life through custom workbook exercises. We are slashing the price for our podcast listeners. Lifetime access to Journey to Greatness is normally $399, but for our podcast listeners, it will be $49 with the code podcast at checkout. Click the banner on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to enroll. Thanks for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you left us a rating and a review. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday. To be the first to listen, subscribe to the podcast on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com. Plus, as a thank you gift, you will receive a free chapter from one of my best-selling books on the habits of high-performing teams. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager, Yaeger, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until next week, I appreciate you.